Let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Leslie Poole. I am going to be the moderator today for our session of panelists who I'm calling the theme Activism with Doc Leeper. We have a very distinguished panel here. We have former State House Majority Leader Sam Bell. I'm going to give you a little information about each of them. Sam represented Volusia County from 1974 to 1988 in the House of Representatives, where he held many leadership positions, including Majority Leader. After his legislative career, he entered the law practice in Tallahassee, where he currently works with Pennington, Moore, Wilkinson, Bell, and Dunbar. He was a neighbor of Doc's in Eldora, which I find fascinating, and tells me that he was involved very much in the founding of ACA today. And so he'll have a lot to tell us. We figure he's the earliest member that we have of the panel, or knew her, had the earliest memories. Congressman Lou Frye Jr. has served the people of Florida in many capacities. He served 5 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, and during this tenure, he worked with Doc and co-sponsored the federal bill to create Canaveral National Seashore. Currently, he is partnered with the law firm of Lowndes, Drosdick, Doster, Cantor, and Reed in Orlando, and is the founder of the Lou Frye Institute of Politics and Government at the University of Central Florida, where he, for the last decade, God bless him, has worked to develop enlightened, responsible, and actively engaged citizens.
Yahoo.
Architect Will Miller was the original architect of the Atlantic Center for the Arts. And he worked closely with Leeper to develop a site plan very closely, he'll tell us this afternoon. He moved to the area as a young man and met Leeper, who corralled him to play tennis and then to work on her center, where he was a founding board member. Several years ago, he helped create the Visitor Center and Gallery at ACA. And then we have attorney Clay Henderson, who is senior counsel at the national law firm of Holland & Knight, where he practices in the public policy section in the areas of environmental law, land use, and smart growth. He's long been associated with environmental policy in Florida, having served as president of Florida Audubon Society, and has involvement and awards from many different environmental groups. He developed the first county endangered lands acquisition program and helped launch the Preservation 2000 and Florida Forever land buying programs. Henderson, a New Smyrna Beach native, has long been involved in local environmental efforts and have worked with Leeper in many environmental initiatives. I'm the only one on this panel who didn't get to meet Doc Leeper, but I just finished my dissertation writing for the University of Florida in the History Department about the role of women in the Florida environmental movement. And of course, Doris Leeper was very important in the Canaveral National Seashore, a driving force, and I discovered many, many women were doing the same kind of work that she did with great determination and the inability to accept the word no, which I find everyone tells me was her greatest characteristic. And a pretty good forehand, we're told. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn to the panel and ask some questions and let them talk to you and give you some of their thoughts and recollections about her. First, let me ask each of you to, if you can, describe Doc in one word, perhaps, and tell us how you met her.
Well, first of all, I would observe that if she were here, she would be raising hell the fact that there are no women on this panel. and something would be done about it. So, and I know Suzanne Cosma's sitting here in the front row, and Jay Urban, a lot of these women are thinking the same thing. So I wanted to let you know.
There'd also be alcohol involved up here.
I don't think you're supposed to say that. Well, tenacity, I guess, if you need a word. But she was wonderful, and I think it's great that we're going to have a chance to discuss her drive in her life.
She had a lighter side. I never found it. Steel. Steele. Boy, when she zeroed in on something, it was easier to work with her than not work with her, and she was really the driving force of what happened here.
I'm going to say driven. I was going to say stubborn, but driven sounds better probably than stubborn. But I also am really thankful to be here and all the nice people and an opportunity to talk and celebrate and so forth. So.
I got it. I mean, more than one word. She was a force of nature. We'll talk more about that. But I'm thinking of a word we've already heard, which is no, because that was a word that was not in her vocabulary.
If she wanted it.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you met her and what projects you worked on with her?
We'll just start your chronologically. So.
Yeah, I guess chronologically. Well, I was a neighbor, had an A-frame house less than a quarter of a mile from docks back in the days long before the Seashore Park was envisioned. One of the negatives is that my property was taken when they created Seashore Park, but I think it was worth it because that would be a solid row of condos all the way down now. I was, for years, had that A-frame. My children grew up there fishing and going to the beach and what have you, and began to play tennis with Doris, and then she conceived of this idea of Atlantic Center, and while it's perfectly clear what it is now, when it was just in her mind, it was very difficult to understand what it was. And particularly after 2 or 3 glasses of scotch, it actually began to sound more reasonable then. But it was, I think in part, it was based on experiences that she had had at the Art Center in North Carolina, where she'd seen different artists come together and collaborate. And the idea is exactly what it is today. I mean, it's purely what she conceived of. And the amazing thing, though, was bringing us all together and using our various talents to help make it a reality.
Well, Marcia Fry was the reason I got involved in it. There's another lady you can't say no to, or at least I can't for 54 years. We started coming over here and playing tennis. I like to play tennis, and that we played, and it was great tennis with Doc. And she had the idea, and of course you were just a kid and an intern in Bill Chappell's office. Those were the days when you talked to people and they didn't ask if you had an R, a D, or an I in the back of your name. It was good enough to take the oath to the Constitution of the U.S. to preserve, protect, and defend. And I think that's one of the reasons things went easier, but Doc could not get along with Bill Chappell. It wasn't even close. She would not talk to Bill Chappell. Therefore, she would talk to me and tell me what she, I wanted done, and this guy, and on, and I, talk to her. I go back, talk to Bill Chappell, who was a great guy and really part of this thing, and I thought I was a heck of a diplomat for a while, And literally, without Bill Chappell's help, this thing wouldn't have gone anywhere. He was on the Appropriations Committee. Democrats ran everything had for 40 or 50 years at the time. And the stars were right, because Chappell was in the House and on the majority thing, and we moved it through there. On the other side of it, we had the fact that Bessert Holland was the senior senator, and gee whiz, we named the bill after him. What a shock that was, that happened, that we were able to do that. And so I was close at the time to somebody, I forget his name, he was president, and he had a slight problem, I think, that took him out of office, but I was close to the Nixon White House. So we were able to get a sign-off from the executive branch, from the Senate, and from the House, and it was really a tri-party thing, if you will, Sam, getting it through. It was the right time at the right place, and it's one of the things I look back on that I'm really pleased I had a part of, and everybody deserves credit for it, but Doc deserves the most because she was the North Star, the guiding star through all this, Clay.
I'll use this.
Okay. Can I follow that up with a question? Let me follow that up with a question then. On the National Seashore website, her name is not mentioned.
Yeah, a lot of our names aren't mentioned.
So what happened there?
Yeah, I actually brought it. I was showing this to Lou earlier. Here is and I remember this came out on January 1st of 2000. It was probably my last conversation with Doc when this came out, and Doc's not mentioned in it at all. Lou gets a little credit, though they misspelled his name. I'm actually mentioned in it as a founder of Friends of Canaveral, but I was literally a 19-year-old congressional intern. I do not take credit for Canaveral National Seashore, but it's just phenomenal, you know, that there's no recognition of her at the seashore as being part of it. I did pull up Wikipedia today, you know, the source that we're not allowed to reference, but it says on the Canaveral National Seashore, incidentally, Doris Leeper was instrumental in the creation of the park. So there you have it.
Why is she left out?
You know, it is, you know, it's a strange thing. It's been part of, there was always this battle in New Smyrna. And as Lou said, there was a tension between the Lou Fry side of the House and the Bill Chappell side of the House, and the folks that were up here that were pushing for the establishment of the seashore. I think they had more interest in developing it than Doc, well, certainly than Doc did, but then others wanted to preserve it for the sake of preservation. And so I'll skip ahead of how I got involved was, and one reason why she hated Chappell so much is because when she was appointed to the initial advisory council, they pushed through on a 3-2 split vote a recommendation that Congress would designate Canaveral as wilderness. And then what she perceived is Chappell overturned that with the administration, and so it was not designated as wilderness. And so there was a tremendous amount of bitterness with her associated with that. And I think sort of, I would say 25 years later, 35 years later, I think she won, because most of Canaveral, I would say today, is managed in effect as wilderness. The amount of places that have public access is very limited. They've done a very good job with that, but I think on the whole she won that battle, but it would have been nice if it could have been designated as wilderness, and that's what brought all that about.
Will, can you talk to us about how you got involved?
Probably when I moved up from South Florida, I think Sam was from South Florida as well. But it all happened in one day. I moved, I came up driving around looking, and I saw a house that was real cheap, and I went to the realtor to see about buying it. The realtor took me in next door to this young attorney named Bill Ross, and Bill said, "Oh, you're an architect moving to town? Well, that's close to being an artist. There's a bunch of artists meeting at my house tonight." So I went over to the house, and they were discussing having an annual sidewalk art show called Images. So that's how I met the whole group, all in the first day I was in town. And so they got me involved doing some things with Images, which morphed into Atlantic Center, or you know, some of the personnel, as some of the literature says. And so it was really, and still is, extremely wonderful to meet some nice people early on, and continue to, and I'm really enjoying listening about how all of us got involved. So I was a little bit after the Seashore Park, although I was at some meetings when that was discussing how to develop it or not develop it, but mostly with a little bit at first on with Images. Martha Grimes was at that meeting, I think, but that's how I got started to know Doc. And then from then, she put me on as a founder on the board of ACA, and we kind of formulated ideas, sitting around either playing tennis or over drink. And she would have out-of-town people coming in, and we'd kick it all around and so forth. A lot of that went on. And one thing, Sam said we kept listening, he wasn't quite sure what it was all about, because she would talk about it. Well, it was even less clear what the buildings were supposed to be doing, because once we got started, she said, okay, well, start designing the buildings. I said, well, what do they need to be? Well, make 3 pods. And I said, well, what's this supposed to be? Well, I don't know, just make the pods. So there was absolutely no program of what the buildings were supposed to be or do or anything other than they were supposed to be really cheap and not cost very much. And all of us that knew Doc remember her pounding the table many, many times with her fists of things that needed to happen. So, but that's how I got involved.
I just have one thing I'd like to add what Clay said and the importance of it. A couple of weeks ago, I just drove down there myself and just drove around and talked to everybody and talked to me. If you put everybody working down there together, there may have been 4 people. Talked to them about the problems they're having, the fact that there's no enforcement of speed at all. You can wreck all the beds you want by driving it because they, number one, don't have a boat for enforcement, and number 2, they don't have anybody to pilot the boat. So this is probably, when you look at the national parks, one of the worst run national parks, not because of the people there. The people are wonderful. They're trying to help and do something, but we haven't given them the resources to do it. And I think now, with however it comes out, as long as Mike is there in one sense, that we got some stuff up there, it's probably time that we go back and maybe regroup and think of what we can do to take this vision that's here and is the greatest thing in the country from just sort of withering away.
Well, that's a good point, and if Doris were here, she'd be leading that. She'd already have signed up 2 or 3 people to give Mike a call. It was interesting as they were going down this road, I got confused. I was thinking Atlantic Center, and they were talking Seashore Park, and what it points out is the different interests that Doris had. She was very much a feminist and didn't mind speaking out on that point. Something she was also not willing to compromise where compromise not compromising was important. I learned some lessons by having her as my art guide at the Images and other places where art was on display. And she was very quick to point out what was good and what wasn't and why. And so that was why I enjoyed so much the time I spent with her, which was a lot of time. I mean, a lot of days there's not much going on down at Mosquito Lagoon other than tennis and contemplating big ideas. But she had a broad range of interests, and as you can see, too, you know, in a lifetime, if you were responsible for one of those, it would be something. But to have done both of those and at the same time been creative in her own right, and the ability then to draw people in. I mean, it was when she began to focus on my ability to get money from the state for Atlantic Center. I mean, it was all over. So anyway, just to add to that, just the breadth of her interest was exceptional.
Will and Clay were both young men when you got involved with Doc. Was this her?
We were all young men.
You were all young men.
What did you say? Write it in the back.
Teenager, okay. So was she attracted to, was she mentoring young people?
Younger men?
I mean, is that what? We're on tape.
Yeah.
I mean, was mentoring young people part of her work, do you think?
Let me say something. She was brilliant, and this is the reason why I think that, if I could say anything, that she was successful in what she was. She was brilliant about putting a group of people together for each of their individual reasons. Mm-hmm. Some of us were put together because some people had money, some had connections or political connections. Some were men, some were women, some were married to a woman or a man that had this or that, and others, so there's connections, or they played tennis good, or they, whatever the reason was. But and she was extremely good about targeting on using that person's specialty and not using them when they weren't appropriate. So you'd be invited to groups when you were needed and not when you weren't. I mean, it was and it all worked to get some things built. And she assembled an incredible group of people, not just board members, but staff members and volunteers. Was phenomenal with the whole Atlantic Center, always has been. And not that Doc assembled, but the center attracted those kind of people, really high integrity people and top of the line people. So I was glad to see those people, meet those people, and enjoy it. So my relationship has been great. And you're right, Clay was 8 years old and I was 12 when we started.
Just picking up on what Will said, I'm going back and looking at stuff that we worked on together and stuff we wrote together, and I come back to I think the brilliance that I saw was she just kept saying what was driving to me what she was about, the cross-fertilization of good ideas. That's what she kept coming back to. What she liked to be able to do is to put a lot of different people in a room and watch them interact, watch the ideas bounce off of each other. You know, it wasn't, you know, she saw the arts and the environment as inseparable. She thought the downfall of education was that we compartmentalized, you know, classes and departments so that there wasn't this cross-fertilization. You know, that's the dynamic that she enjoyed watching and enjoying bringing together. And this was the place where that happened. I remember one time, you know, when you got invited to something, you went because you knew it was some master scheme that she had. And I got out here and I realized I didn't know a soul here. And I guess it was her way of telling me that I really wasn't very well read, because I think I was the only one here that didn't have a Pulitzer Prize.
Well, I might pick up on that by saying that another one of her qualities was she was so well read and informed. And one of the great joys was an afternoon spent in her living room down there talking about public affairs. And of course, Lou Fry, and with his institute, has kind of continued that same kind of dialogue. Roy Lassiter, who's here, has been involved with you in that. But we in the day, created something called the Ethics of Change, that was where we had white papers. We invited scholars to talk about important issues, and some were political importance, some were more academic. We had two professors from FSU who were, one was a classics professor and the other was a humanities professor, and we got into a heated debate which caused these two professors to exit the room out onto the deck and almost get into a fist fight over some wording in Plato's Republic. I mean, literally, this was, and those were such great days. You came away feeling like you really had an opportunity to meet with people who thought and considered and weighed the pros and cons of issues, and were in a civil, except for these professors, in a civil way to discuss the issues.
You've described a woman with a strong personality. Did it work more for her or against her and her efforts?
Look.
Would she be able to accomplish as much in today's world?
That's a good question.
I truly think so. Common sense is not illegal, it's rare. And I think a vision, a desire to do something that will leave a mark and make it better is still out there. And I have enough faith in our system that Doc would be maybe a little frustrated and take her a little more time, but I don't see her not accomplishing what she wanted.
Well, you told me an interesting story that kind of illustrates her love of the environment and art together, about trying to do the first site clearing for this property.
yeah.
Could you tell us that story?
Well, after I designed the buildings, and we had one of the board members, Frank Hubbards, donated all his equipment to clear the roads and so forth. So he had a front-end loader guy come over. Actually, I spent about a week and a half with Paul Cosmos walking through here, trying to lay out what kind of road we could come in and where. I went up in a helicopter. That's Doc's connections, the mosquito control people with the county. Doc got the helicopter driver to pick me up so we could go up there. It's all illegal, I'm sure, but anyway, so I lay out with a yellow tape all through the woods here, and it was thick. There's no way you could enter or walk around anywhere without getting scratched and cutting things and trying to chop your way through and trying to figure out where to take the roads and where the buildings ought to be. More than a week we were doing this. And so we had it taped out. A guy, the front-end loader guy, Buck Finley, was a driver, and we met out there, and I told Doc we're going to meet at 8 o'clock, and he's going to start the road in there. And so she came out and met us. And so I had the yellow tape there of where the road's going. I said, okay, we're going to take out, we take out the material that's in here. I'm extremely sensitive and caring about the environment and trees and don't want to damage anything. But to bring a road in where there's 50,000 bushes and trees and shrubs, you got to take something out. So we come in, and I said, Doc says, well, where are you taking? I said, well, right through here. So he said, well, you're not taking that tree out. And I said, that's not a tree, it's a bush. It's a shrub. That's not, no, you're not taking that out at all. It was probably 2-inch diameter. And I said, well, you want to take that one out or that one out? Because one of them's got to go. No, I don't want to take either one of them out. You got to bring it through here. So this went on literally for 3 hours. She wouldn't let the guy start anything and then I finally said, there's 8 feet between the two little trees, and you can't have a road 8 feet wide. So I literally came over and I said, Buck, take that tree out, and I want you to go right through there. And she said, you are not taking that tree out. And I said, we are taking that tree out. And she said, well, I'm not having anything to do with this. I'm leaving. And I said, good. And so she got in her car and left, didn't come back for a couple weeks till we had that road through there. And so
the contribution that Will and I have up here is that she fussed at us more than she ever had a nice word to say to us, and I think that my contribution was that this is a painful thing to say, but I was the only one that could ever say no to her, and she hated that. But and some of these guys, now Sam will tell you, Sam was afraid to ever say no to her. I'm sure you never did. I would be often put in that position. I had not heard this story, but it reminds me of when the Park Service decided to put, if you're familiar with the Eldora Loop Road in, and there's a parking lot there's a trail through the Maritime Hammock that goes through there. And literally one morning, my phone rang, and it was the superintendent of Canaveral National Seashore, and Doc was, at this point, chained to an oak tree down there. And they wanted me to come try to talk some sense into her. Well, we got into a very heated argument that day, and I was trying to explain, trying to, work this through. She was not happy at all. And, in her unhappiness, I'm sure went all the way to Washington, D.C., over the backs of the superintendent and all the way to the Secretary of the Interior. But she really wasn't. I mean, she would literally, there wasn't a tree out there that she didn't want to protect. But sometimes, she, again, just not willing to compromise about any of that. But still, some of it had to be done.
Yeah.
I did have a difficult time saying no to her, and I wanted to talk a bit about her competitiveness, and we've talked a lot about tennis, but we played some very good tennis, and it got better as the afternoon went on because a couple of scotches, it seemed like you were better. But one day we were down there playing on her court, and Lou and I were tennis partners, and we were playing doubles. And we were really anxious to win, and we were playing hard. And Lou went back to retrieve a deep shot, and he ran into the fence, and right there on his forehead, he still has the scar where he just about bled to death.
And Doc wouldn't quit playing. She said, "We're ahead." I thought to myself, but anyway, she was a competitor.
That's exactly right.
But did she gain enemies that thwarted some of her plans from her personality? Do you think?
Probably, but they're not around here.
And you know, we use the word like. I don't think that was in her vocabulary. You fit in a certain place, and like in a chess game, you know, you were the king or the rook or whatever, and that's what it was. And the personal side and the emotions, that was your problem. If you were doing what she wanted to do, it was all right. That's enough. That was her. You put together a puzzle, and she was really good at putting puzzles together and using all of us in a way that made sense to her, sometimes not to us.
Right. I would say, being the strong personality she was, I would say, I don't know of anyone she didn't offend and yell at, and whether you could pick yourself up and still feel okay about yourself or not, but that was Doc's personality, certainly.
You'll get over it, Will. I did.
I know it's been tough for me, but she would, yes, very strong personality and very strong, and she did, you know, cause friction. She caught, and you know, before she died, she talked to me about it, and I know Jay knew a lot too, and she was aware and felt bad that she lost a lot of friends because of her drive, or the words that we used to describe her. And so many times in the drive it takes to get something built, you're also you're losing something for everything you gain many times. And so she lost some things that some friendships and things, because of that drive. So it's not just Doc, but this is characteristic of a lot of things that are done politically, I'm sure you know.
I find it interesting that a woman who wasn't a native Floridian had such an impact on Florida. Do you see a correlation, or how did that happen?
Well, I can tell you she loved the area that's now the Seashore Park. She loved Mosquito Lagoon and Eldora. And I mean, and to be honest with you, that's not an area for everyone. I mean, they don't call it Mosquito Lagoon for nothing. I mean, but she loved that area, and she loved Florida. There's no doubt about that. She liked New Smyrna and was very happy to be here. And she had such a full and good life, I think. I mean, she enjoyed so many things. She was so interested in people and what they thought and said, and she was just more fun to be around. I mean, people wouldn't have come down all the way down to Eldora if it wasn't a heck of a lot of fun. And bringing people together was a lot of what she did, as Lou has said. And of course, this great list of our national members of our national committee was so exciting for those of us here in little New Smyrna. And I remember one day we was over there in the kind of dining area at a table, and we're going to have dinner, and there's Edward Albee there. And so I get my food and I go over and I sit down and I think, man, I'm going to have some time here where I can really to hear him talk, and I can ask some questions. And all of a sudden, this loudmouth, pushy woman comes over and squeezes in and starts talking, and I thought, who in the hell is this that's messing up my opportunity with Edward Albee? It turned out it was Beverly Pepper. No, the sculptor. I mean, an internationally famous sculptor. But I didn't know that at the time. All I knew is that she had messed up my opportunity to talk with Edward Albee.
You know, don't you think, too, Sam, you've seen it in the legislature, Clay, you've dealt with the whole time, that I think many people who come to Florida are more environmentally conscious than a lot of other states, because we've got something you can be proud of and you can work with. I mean, there's God bless Dakota, but I mean, you know, it doesn't have quite the ambience that we do. And secondly, I think Doc was sort of ahead of what was going on in the world, the change in the status of women in the sports in Title IX, looking at the law firms now where half the people in the management committee or close to it are women in the medical field. A couple of our daughters actually were involved so much in it that we got national legislation through prohibiting dumping of chemicals in the ocean. They were on my back, and the other was shooting from airplanes and game out there. So, you know, women were having their say in the academies. We had the equal rights vote in the 70s, women in the academies. A lot of things were changing, and so Doc was not necessarily out on point by herself. But there were a lot of changes going on, systemic changes, and I think she was one of the best representatives of what was happening in our country.
I agree.
What do you think her greatest legacy will be?
Well, I think it'll be Atlantic Center, but these guys, I'm sure, will say Seashore Park. But,
can I have both of them? Well, seriously, I think both of them.
I think they're both, and let me just add to it. We've not mentioned anything about Spruce Creek, the preserve that is named for her. Suzanne took the leadership in making sure that happened. I can tell you that was also a great love of hers. She loved this site. She loved this location. We literally, on the floor of my office with old black and white aerials and magic marker pen, drew out the boundaries of what is today 2,500 acre Spruce Creek, or Doris Leeper, Spruce Creek, I can't say it, Spruce Creek Preserve. And my job was to go get it approved in Tallahassee. I had a plane scheduled to ride up for the meeting, and one of these nasty tropical storms, blew in. We had to set the plane down. I was late getting there. I got to the meeting late, and this first time up, it was not approved. I caught hell for that from her. She had the thing that we rolled out, that she kept a copy of it. She rolled it up, and I can tell you that on many occasions over the years, she whacked me with that map because she didn't think I was doing enough to get this preserve completed and acquired, and that is true. And I assure you that the next year, then we went back up there. I didn't fly. I drove the night before to make sure that I got there. We got it approved. And then, I want to also be very clear. I mean, we talk about the people that she involved. Is named for her. I'm often associated with this, but the people that she pulled into this, she pulled in the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation, ACA was involved in some of these things. All of us were tapped to do different things to make this work. We forget that there were probably over 20 parcels that came together through all kinds of different programs to make this work. I saw Jack Asherle here earlier. I remember Jack is actually who got me involved in the beginning, and in that beginning we were literally going around from one city to the other passing the hat to collect change to get this done. So I throw that in the mix because ACA, that's great, Canaveral-Seashore, that's great, but there's not just one thing that she did, and it was because of pulling all these folks together, herding the cats, keeping them moving, that these ideas become reality.
I might point out that, as I said, I own property in the Eldora area, so it was taken from me to do the Seashore Park. I also own 40 acres in the Spruce Creek that was taken from me. So I'm still pissed off.
You can't win.
I wonder if we might ask how many people in the crowd knew Doc?
All right.
Oh, wow. How many played tennis with her? Yeah? How many had a scotch with her? Oh, my. That's wonderful. Well, Clay, I know that you said something to me earlier about you had a an agenda today you wanted to mention. So
you
have her friends here.
I have a few friends here. We've all alluded to it, and I actually thought about this or heard a little bit about this last year. I do think that it is more than an oversight that Doc's legacy and her contribution to Canaveral National Seashore is not acknowledged. And in fact, you know, they've now, this history that is no longer on their website, but they've now put up their full historical list of all the historical artifacts within the park, and they note that there is a house down there in the park that an artist resided in for some period of time, who has some recognition. She actually, I'm paraphrasing this, is she actually, there was a number of sculpture work that she did, and one of them hangs in the Orlando airport. And that's on the website. No aspect whatsoever of relationship to the park or its creation or whatnot. But she was there for that period of time. I think what is appropriate, what is absolutely appropriate, and those of us who knew her, who can collect the stories and pull this together, should dedicate ourselves to doing this. That house needs to be on the National Register of Historic Places. And associated with her as a state and national figure, and her ideas and her contributions, and that will of course force them to have to tell the story that we all in this room know is the story and know is the truth, and it needs to be part of that. Any of us who watched the Ken Burns film on the National Park Service, the National Park System, all know that behind every national park there's a story of a person like Doc who had the tenacity and the vision, and that no one could tell her no, to make that national park a reality. That's her story. That needs to be told there, and I think the best way to do that is to have that house, Capers Acres, be in the National Register. So let's do it. The other takeaway is that Sam alluded to this, and which is the what did you call that? The February series, the ethics of change. One of the things that late in her life that we talked a lot about and worked on together was the idea, this idea of how to generate good ideas through interdisciplinary work, bringing people together, having this cross-fertilization of good ideas. And she always thought that ACA did that very well with these ethics of change programs that many of us participated in, bringing together people with divergent views, smart people, bright people, and out of that white papers were developed, and people talked about those for on and on. For her, the central idea for her that impressed me was this concept that the built environment, you know, should reflect the natural values of the natural environment. That's what this place is. You know, you look around, you could never recreate ACA with the code systems that we have today. You know, you could never do that. This place is a tribute to that idea. And I hope that those of us that still remember those, this is a great facility, we got people interested in this, that we try to find ways and opportunities to recreate that. Bring people together. Bring together divergent, smart people with good ideas, focusing on important issues. And out of that, birth some new great ideas in her name that we can move forward with. I think that also would be a very good legacy.
Any final comments you would like to make, or ideas that how about we might accomplish this historical designation?
Well, I think we've got the material, and I think we. I mean, we've got the material. There's no reason that there's no requirement the National Park Service would do this. We could impress this upon them, I think, as a way to do it. I think they would want to do it. Actually, what they told me is that they had initially sent it up the flagpole, and funny that they didn't know enough about her to be able to do it. So it's just because of the turnover that's there. So I think we can pull that together.
Clay, what about the thing, at least that bothers me, is the fact we've got a jewel, but no one's polished it for a number of years, and it's going into absolute, it's a mess.
Yeah. Well, that's as you know, that's an appropriations issue. That is working with local members of Congress to get them involved, as you were, and certainly Micah has been good at that, although he no longer represents this area. You know, we need to do that. There needs to be more and better stewardship of the seashore. And Sam's got that look about him. He's thinking about something. So.
Well, I think it's a good idea. All three of those ideas are good. I'm thinking, Lou, that maybe you and Roy and others might at some point bring a Fry Institute event to Atlantic Center and use that as a...
Mr. Chairman, is that all right?
And that's a wonderful idea. and use that as the backdrop and really make something of a Lou Fry Institute weekend at Atlantic Center as a starter.
Great idea. Yeah, we're having Monday the 20th symposium. We average about 600 kids a day at that, and the issue we're looking at this time is the Constitution is irrelevant. And it'll be interesting discussion for all day, but that coupled with what the law that Graham, we've got changed, we'll have in 5 years from now, we're going to have 1 million Florida kids who've had at least a year of civics.
That's great.
And can pass that to can go to 8th grade. And by the way, reading and writing, FCAT, got to deal with, but 15% of now what you teach in reading and writing has to be about civics from kindergarten up through 12th grade. Florida will not be 46th in the country in terms of civic education. We're going to be in the top 5. Just give us, it'll take 4 or 5 years, but it's going to happen. And it's I hate even bipartisan. It's Graham had a good idea and I had a good idea and we talked and it worked. It's sort of the way it's supposed to be.
Leslie's looking to wrap up. I found some. I went through. I had a glass of wine. Excuse me. I had a bottle of wine last night, and I went back through old stuff that we had written together and that I hadn't looked at in a long time. And actually, I found something that she wrote to me that I'm going to.
That Doc wrote to you.
That Doc wrote to me that I probably need to frame and put somewhere because it is. You can see the influence that that she's had. On my life personally, but others. But this whole idea of this bringing together the built and natural environment. The natural and man-made environments are one. For too long, we have seen them as existing side by side, yet somehow separately. This thinking has not promoted the best understanding of the intrinsic relationship between the natural and the built environment and of the critical issues which must be understood and addressed if the environmental preservation is to be furthered while populations grow, and with that the growth of even further demands on our already fragile natural systems. That's a powerful statement.
What year was that?
1993.
1993. Wonderful. Any?
Yeah, I want to add one thing. I think that Ethics of Change had symposiums, and I was on one with Sam, and the title of that, I remember back in the 80s, I think, was Man versus Nature. And in that, I think the way I approach a design is that I assume whoever has the site, whether it's on the ocean or in the woods, in the mountains, or here on the 20 acres that we started with or whatever, but they have a good feeling, they feel good there. So I try to use the character of the site as the inspiration for the design. So that in that way, and Doc and I talked about this, in that way the building has a sense of place as part of the site, and it's not competing with the site or destroying the site. So it would enhance what's there and the character of it. And so in that symposium, I remember too, back in the 80s, I didn't like the title of it, Man versus Nature. I saw man is part of nature and not competing or trying to compete, but being a part and allowing man to enhance nature, as you can with the building, or you can destroy nature with the building. So we have that choice as people. Anyway, it's an interesting little, I like that Ethics of Change, those symposiums that were happening, that were nice.
Would it be proper to yield to the gentle lady?
Oh,
Which lady? Oh, you're talking about Congresswoman? Gentle lady?
I think, give Suzanne the mic.
That's what I was trying to say nicely. Should have known in this group, wouldn't work.
Let me just say,
It's my first client, by the way.
first client, I was on the other side of the court when you injured your head. I was Doc's partner. And then we went to my house for lunch and we drank wine. And Sam and I have been at this a long time together. All the adjectives that you all use to describe Doc are obvious ones that those of us who knew her would agree with. The tenacious was the first that came to my mind. I think iron, I think driven, and never say no would all be appropriate. Once we did a little celebration here for Doc, and I was asked to speak, and it was pretty much off the cuff, but I said, for me, and I say this with great affection because she was a wonderful friend, personal friend of mine. She was a master manipulator. Yeah. And I think what you're hearing them describe is exactly that, the ways in which she was able to bring people together and elicit from them what they had to offer for the vision that she had was masterful. And many of us are still here and still looking for ways in which we might please Doc. And I think it's fair to say I could tell a lot of personal stories. I lived also in what was the Canaveral Seashore Park before it was a park. And I had 4 children, 3, 4, 5, and 7. And Doc Leeper was really the only other person who lived down there. And she would drive by our house and my kids would throw pebbles at her car because they never saw a soul. You know, it's pretty wild. But we all became very, very good friends. And so personally, she was a great friend of mine. And 3 of my family members have served on the board at Atlantic Center for the Arts, including my ex-husband, who Will said walked the grounds with him, and not only that, came home one day and said, well, I signed a personal note for the land and the construction at Atlantic Center. And there are others in the room here I know who their family members also had signed a personal note in order that Atlantic Center could be built. But for me, and she has been an inspiration for me personally in politics and in my life as I don't quite go, what would Doc do? But sometimes when you feel like, should I give up on this? You say, no, Doc would not give up on this. And she's with me. I say that in all sincerity. And I think one of the reasons that we're celebrating this and that each of us had this very strong feeling for Doc was because what she wanted us to do, we wanted to do. At the end of the day, we recognized that her vision was so valuable and so long-standing. These were not flash-in-the-pan things. These are things that obviously have lived beyond her and will live beyond us. And I think her ability to make us clear in that vision and to make us want to be part of it is something that I truly cherish on a personal level. And I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you for giving me the microphone. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, we're glad to hear that. Well, I'm going to wrap that up here and say thank you to our panel for participating today and turn this over to Nancy. Thank you all for joining us, and we're looking forward to more stories. There's actually a phone booth in the back, everybody, that can take a video recording if you so care to share about a 2-minute memory of Doc or the center that they're recording for posterity here. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Frost. I'm a co-director here at Atlantic Center for the Arts, along with Nancy Loudon-Norman. And we just want to take a moment to thank you all for coming out today, to show your support of Atlantic Center, to hear all these wonderful stories about Doris Doc Leeper, the founding of Atlantic Center, the Spruce Creek Preserve, the National Seashore, all of the great, wonderful work that she's done. We really appreciate everyone being here and supporting ACA today. Thank you.
It has really been an exciting year for us, celebrating our 35th anniversary and really celebrating those parts of Doc. Many of you know her with her affiliation with Atlantic Center as an amazing artist, and earlier in the year we had a great exhibition of her work here, and now to have this exhibit, Doris Leeper, environmentalist and visionary, we're so excited that she's really getting the recognition that she deserves for the amazing work that she has done. Whenever anyone comes to visit Atlantic Center, I always tell them that this is testament to one person's vision. Every school group that comes in, every new volunteer we have, but it's a testament to all of you. Your support is what keeps this place going. Your support is what enabled the Doris Leeper Spruce Creek Preserve to happen. That acreage is contiguous to our acreage here. So we're living in it every day, and I thank you so much. And I thank each of you for sharing your stories. Leslie, thank you so much for moderating. And now we're going to hear from another old friend of Atlantic Center, John E. Evans. And everyone, we're going to be doing a champagne toast, and I hope you join us and continue to share in our stories.
When they asked me to come and lead this toast and kind of wrap up this session, I spent some little time making some notes so that I could touch on some of the high points. When I got done, I walked back upstairs from my office and told my wife, you know, that panel, all those smartasses are going to tell all the good stories before it'll ever get to me. And gentlemen, you have proved me right. You've brought back, all of you, so many memories. And thinking about this day, I pondered what to say, and I thought about so much that's gone on. It doesn't seem possible that so much time has gone by. But then there are signs that it has. For example, back in those early days, Belle had a half a head of hair that was nearly as luxuriant as Will's. There's some pictures from the 70s that are quite revealing. And Will talked about the episode with the tree. There's more to that story, because we were attempting to start a television documentary on what was going on. And we were out there with the cameras while all of that was going on. And I got along much better with Doc for quite some time afterwards, because I threatened to put that segment of her slamming the car door and driving off in a cloud of dust on the television if we had a lot of troubles. Will also didn't mention that he had the front end loader guy knock down the strongest of those two little saplings that were there in hopes that the other one would die. And Will, as I came in this afternoon, I stopped out here about where that was. And I looked really hard, and unless I'm mistaken, we've got about a 45-foot, I don't know whether it's a scrope or a water oak up there, but about a 45-foot tree that I think was the one that she saved. I'm not really sure, but I think so. And look at all that's grown in the shade of it. Given the start, I suppose it's only proper today that if you Google the name Doris Leeper, as I suspect Clay's done, you get about 925,000 responses pop up, by far the majority of which deal with her art. But if you just type in Doris Leeper, leave the Doc part of it out, there's another 174,000 entries pop up, most of which will relate back to the conservation activities, to the Spruce Creek Preserve, the Doris Leeper Spruce Creek Preserve. And it reflects the things we've heard about this afternoon, of her running battle with the variety of bureaucrats and the politicians over how best the seashore should be developed, how to preserve Eldora, and what to do about Spruce Creek. I won't say she felt strongly about it, as we've heard, but I will note that I once rode past Capers Acres in an airboat with Bill Chappell, and she saw us, and she didn't speak to me for 3 months afterwards. Consorting with the enemy in her book is treason. Chappell noted on the process, though, we were very lucky there wasn't any anti-airboat fire. One of those Google entries took note of Doc's Eldora compound, and I had to chuckle at its description of how she brought fame to New Smyrna Beach as she, quote, lived and painted in seclusion in Eldora. in seclusion in Eldora. Well, sure, she threw everybody out from time to time so she could get a little work done. But if she'd been in seclusion, we wouldn't be here today. A great cross-section, as we've heard, of the leaders of our area met regularly with Doc to conduct serious scientific experiments as to what levels of which brand of booze best repelled the beast for whom Mosquito Lagoon was named, and to dream and to scheme the schemes and the dreams that are unfolding yet in this place at this time. To talk about the kinds of things that Clay has suggested to us we ought to pick up and leave here to accomplish. When she got done, if she could be with us here today, when she got done bitching about the absence of women on this panel, she'd object to a whole lot of what these guys have had to say. She'd say that they gave her way too much credit for just having helped others recognize the right thing to do. She was very fond of that phrase, you just need to do the right thing. And the fact that that happened to be the thing that she just told you to do was entirely beside the point. She'd tell us that what we really ought to be doing here today is to start celebrating Clay's birthday, which is tomorrow. And that we ought to do it with more than the champagne we're about to post a toast with. And then she'd recall the hours that she spent working with all of these people, and with Howard and Charlotte and Frank and Francis and Jay and Marcia and Ed and so many others. Jack, Suzanne, people who enabled her to see her dreams begin to take shape and form. She considered that her strength was in each one of these people. She didn't think of herself as powerful or potent, and she'd never admit to being stubborn. But she understood that it's in the strength of bringing a bunch of people together, and as we've heard, the fact that you could bring together people from differing walks of life makes such a difference. She would approve of Clay's having told the story of her hitting him with the rolled up plans from the drawn on his office floor. And she would have loved it that he used that story about a month ago in a letter to the Volusia County Council, trying to get them to see the light of how to deal with some very contentious issues that were before them on how the preserve should be developed and maintained.
She would have also disagreed with my position on it, by the way.
Well, that's very true. She'd tell us that we all need to be reminded that just because she's not physically here doesn't mean that there isn't a lot left to be done to make the Atlantic Center live up to the potential she preached, to have the influence that she sought, and to touch the lives that were to her its greatest mission. At the end of the first decade of the Atlantic Center, I wrote in the introduction to a little book by that name that Jay Urban was very instrumental in putting together at that time, that it started as a single dream. Today, it is a widely shared reality, and tomorrow demands the best efforts of all of us. And now, 35 years later, that's still very true. And in that spirit, do I have a glass here? Thank you. In that spirit, let me ask that you join me in a toast. First, to Doc and to what she inspired. Second, to those who've lifted her legacy to new heights. And lastly, to ourselves in commitment for building on that foundation. Let us drink to Doc Leeper. Cheers.